Greetings. This is the John Savers Variety Spotlight Show. My name is John Savers. I'm your host. And today we will look at a spotlighted show, which I hope you enjoy. We try to feature people, ideas, actions that are meant to pique the curiosity of the people in Northern Virginia, interest them, and so forth. We hope we succeed, and we think that many will find the program enjoyable. Now, today we're going to
take a detour and look at Alexander Pechersky, who we are told was a highly competent Jewish Soviet army officer who headed the Sobibor Uprising and escape. Remember Abraham Bomba's story involving a friend's wife coming in for a haircut at Treblinka, and how we found the story was strangely weak on the logistics side of things?
Because they needed the woman's hair to be transported to Germany.
We'll juxtapose emotional storytelling and logistics with Pechersky also. First, the storytelling. Alexander Pechersky wrote a book, which Arad uses as a source for this story on page 315. One of the sick was a young man from Holland who could hardly stand on his feet. His wife, who was in the women's barrack, found out where her husband was being taken. She threw herself at the Germans, screaming, "Murderers! I know where you are taking my husband. Take me with him. I will not, you hear, I will not live without him. Murderers! Scum!" She took her husband's arm, supporting him, and marched off with the others to her death. Now let's look at Pechersky's ability to put forth some logistical facts via a drawing of the camp. If Pechersky had really been there observing everything, he would not have drawn a map like this. Considering that, look at the sketch while I read from page 310 in Arad. From the talks with Feldhendler and from his own observations, Pechersky learned about everything he needed for planning a mass escape. He gathered information about the camp and its occupants, about the security arrangements, the fences and the minefields, and about the routine of life in the camp. Wow, the stories always come through with quite a wallop, but the logistics never seem to come through at all. Arad writes about Pechersky in a flattering way, but that's nothing compared to what Hollywood can do. Here we are in the Internet Movie Database, and we'll scroll down and see that Alexander Pechersky is played by Rutger Hauer. By the way, there's Thomas Toivy Blatt of the Blatt model. We'll click on the link to the trailer. Here's the map, here's Pechersky, here's Hollywood.
Action-adventure hero Rutger Hauer stars in an incredible true tale of courage and triumph.
Those of you who survive, bear witness. Let the world know what has happened here.
Escape from Sobibor.
You have arrived at Sobibor. This is a labor camp. If you do your jobs, you will have nothing to fear.
During the Nazi rule, the most secret and brutal camp of all was Sobibor.
This is a death camp. Every day a train comes. All the people, everyone who goes to the showers is dead. Men, women, children, everyone. We survive for a reason. Revenge. And someday we will have it.
It is here that one man devised the most daring escape of World War II.
Alexander Pechersky loses all credibility because he describes a gas chamber floor that opens up so that all the people can fall into carts on the railroad tracks below. In Carlo Matono's book, Belsec, we read Pechersky's description of the Sobibor gas chamber floor. At first sight, one has the impression of entering a bathhouse like any other, faucets for hot and cold water, wash basins. As soon as all have entered, the doors are closed with a heavy thump. A heavy black substance comes down in swirls from the openings in the ceiling. One hears frantic screams, but not for very long, because they change to gasping, suffocating breaths and to convulsions. Mothers are said to have been covering their children with their bodies. The bath keeper observes the whole procedure through a window in the ceiling. Within a quarter of an hour, everything is over. The floor opens and the corpses fall into carts waiting below in the basement of the bathhouse. As soon as they are full, they move away quickly. It is all done according to the latest German technology. Outside, the corpses are discharged in a certain order and doused with gasoline, which is then lit. Right there, they burn. Here's the source. It's a passage from Pechersky's book that Yitzhak Arad conveniently leaves out of his chapter on Pechersky. No historian today believes in the collapsing floor, but supposed eyewitnesses were still saying this as late as 1961, when one of them wound up on the witness stand in the Eichmann trial. Yakov Biskowitz testified for half an hour, and then the judge asked him for some clarification on the collapsing gas chamber floor, which Biskowitz had casually mentioned. The judge likely knows that's not part of the accepted story and tries to make a save by hoping Biskowitz will say the floor is something he didn't personally see, he just heard about. The judge asks, "You described the inside of the gas chamber. For example, you told us how the floor opened up and the bodies fell below into the railway wagons, into the hollow below. Did you see this with your own eyes, or are you talking of things that you heard from others? I will describe a shocking scene here, but first of all, did you, in general, have an opportunity of seeing these things from the inside?" Not everybody had the opportunity, but I, by chance, did. Then Biskowitz tells a very weak story which I'll spare you, and the judge then asks a point-blank question. Please understand me, you are somewhat familiar with these matters. Did you see the floor when it had opened up? I did not see that. I merely saw that underneath the gas chamber there was a hollow which already contained bodies. Thank you, Mr. Biskowitz. You have concluded your testimony. I know you have not told us everything, but there was no alternative. There was another shocking case which I witnessed, and I should like to describe just this one further incident. I am very sorry. I have already explained it to you. It is not only those who appear here who want to relate their story, and it is simply not possible. Thank you very much, and shalom. Biskowitz got shooed off the witness stand, but he still made it into Yitzhak Arad's book. Here's Arad using Biskowitz's Eichmann trial testimony. Like Hilberg, Arad gleans seemingly credible passages from discredited accounts. Biskowitz got over diabolical with his story, but he still made the New York Times the next day, not as a discredited witness, but as a star witness. In an article titled "Mutiny of the Jews at Camp Related," we see that the New York Times, having had nearly 20 years to get the Sobibor story straight, tells their readers that, after the Jews had been gassed, the floor of the chambers opened and the bodies were dropped into trolleys for the run to the crematory pits. The New York Times can't get the story right because the witnesses can't get the story straight because they're lying. That's likely why there was no attempt by Israel's Holocaust Museum to preserve the Eichmann trial film footage. A key point is that the Eichmann trial wasn't just about Eichmann. It covered the whole alleged Holocaust, and 500 hours of footage was filmed. In an article in The Nation, we read what Israel's Holocaust Museum did with the footage. Not only were the tapes left to deteriorate in an uncatalogued heap, with the rights to them sold piecemeal, a frequent fate of films and television footage, but the material was eventually made inaccessible. When the young Israeli filmmaker Eyal Sivan learned of the tapes in 1991 and asked to see them, he was informed that this footage didn't exist. This wasn't a complete lie. When Sivan and writer Roni Brauman at last got their hands on the tapes, they estimated that a third of the footage had decayed so badly that it could no longer be viewed. And therein lies the strength of Steven Spielberg's Shoah project, not in preserving film, but because after 50 years people were finally getting the story straight, with the help of Spielberg minimizing the facts and focusing on emotional content.
The survivors of the Shoah have given us all a powerful message for the future. Now it's up to you to help deliver that message.
Notice the sad music in the background.
I asked this couple, when are we going to be reunited with our parents? And she pointed to one of the chimneys of the crematoria, which I didn't even see until then. And it was then that I noticed these 4 brick chimneys bellowing fire and soot. And she said, do you see this chimney? I said, yes. She says, there go your parents. And when you'll go through the chimneys, you'll be reunited.
Maybe they're not getting the story straight after 50 years, because the chimney is attached to a crematory oven, and a crematory oven wouldn't produce a flame that would come out the top of the chimney. She says 4 brick chimneys bellowing fire and soap, although she meant smoke.
Until then. And it was then that I noticed these 4 brick chimneys bellowing fire and soot. And she said, do you see this chimney? I said, yes. She says, there go your parents. And when you'll go through the chimneys, you'll be reunited.
This young black man might be thinking that the slavery that happened to his ancestors is nothing compared to the Holocaust. Except what happened to his ancestors really happened.
Seeing the faces and hearing the voices of survivors helps students make the connection between history and the moral choices they confront in their own lives.
The third act is turning the survivors into educators.
The challenge then presented itself to transform these deeply personal testimonies into practical tools of education.
She might be an American Indian, learning about the Holocaust, but why is it that the theme of "we can't let history repeat itself" never presented when learning about the American Indians, so that a native population somewhere else is not destroyed? The American Indians were an indigenous people who got kicked off their land and decimated. And in this case, history is repeating itself because indigenous people, like the Palestinians, are getting kicked off their land by the Israelis.
Practical tools of education.
I feel it's my obligation to inform and educate those kids and tell them that actually the Holocaust did happen. And maybe by education, we can prevent another Holocaust.
We have already mentioned that the original plan for escape out of Sobibor was an underground tunnel. Listen to the tunnel description looking for how deep it was underground. According to the plan, the tunnel's height and width would have to be 75 by 75 centimeters, and it would need to be 80 centimeters beneath the Earth's surface so that it would not touch mine holes. It could not go any deeper because there was a danger that it might strike water. What Yitzhak Arad means is this. We'll use a beachside cliff to illustrate. They have to start the tunnel 80 centimeters beneath the Earth's surface because there could be landmines here. The tunnel is 75 centimeters by 75 centimeters. It can't go any deeper because there was a danger that it might strike water. So past what distance is there the danger of striking water? 80 centimeters plus 75 centimeters, which is 1.55 meters. That is 5 feet 1 inch. If you go past that, there's danger of striking water. And who better to know that than the inmates? After all, they're the ones who put the bodies in the burial pits. Now let's see how deep the burial pits were. Remember this 1.55 number. Yitzhak Arad writes on page 33, the burial pits were 5 to 7 meters deep. 7 meters is 23 feet. So here you can only dig 5 feet 1 inch, and here you can dig 23 feet. Well, maybe the land at Sobibor had different elevations, so that one could dig deeper in certain areas. But thanks to Claude Lanzmann's movie Shoah, DVD Disc 1, Chapter 42, We can find out. Here's Landsman sitting at the Sobibor train station. That's the Sobibor train station sign right there.
Le bâtiment de la gare, les rails, les quais, c'est exactement les mêmes qu'en 1942. Rien n'a changé depuis 1942.
Jeżeli chodzi o dworzec, szyny, perony od 1942 roku, nic się tutaj nie zmieniło,
nic.
Prawda? Rien.
Le camp commençait où exactement? La limite du camp.
Gdzie dokładnie zaczynał się obóz? Gdzie była granica obozu?
To proszę może podejdziemy, ja wskażę dokładnie.
Alors, je vais vous montrer exactement.
Tu w tym miejscu, gdzie się znajdujemy, przebiegała wschodnia granica obozu w kierunku tamtych drzew widocznych.
Il y avait une palissade qui allait juste vers ces arbres qu'on voit là.
So that's all flat land.
A tu w kierunku zachodnim na te drzewa liściaste przebiegała
And that's all flat land.
granica południowa
Et puis il y avait une
obozu.
autre palissade qui allait vers les arbres qu'on voit là-bas.
Je voudrais voir. Ici, là, si je suis là, je suis dans l'enceinte du camp. C'est bien
Także
ça.
tutaj pan Landsman już...
And that's all flat land. Yet the tunnel digging couldn't go past 5 feet 1 inch, but the burial pits are described as 23 feet deep. Now let's walk a few paces out of top secret death camp and back to public train station.
Już jest w środku obozu.
Już pan Landsman jest na terenie obozu.
Bon, et puis ici, je n'y suis plus. Là, je suis à 15 mètres de la gare. Déjà, là, je suis en dehors du camp.
A tutaj już 2 kroki dalej, już jest ta część, która była poza ogrodzeniem, prawda?
Tak.
Oui.
Dostępna Polakom
Oui,
i
les
personelowi
personnel
kolejowemu.
Tout ça, c'est la partie polonaise, et puis ça, c'est la mort.
Także tutaj była ta część polska, a tam już...
Let's look at the U.S. Holocaust Museum website on the Sobibor entry. We see they've described the area with the word swampy. That's odd that the Germans would pick a swampy area for digging large pits to bury thousands of bodies. Basically, the storytellers picked the spot, not the Germans. The storytellers only remembered the possibility of striking water while digging a hole when it came to their drama. Claude Landsman and a film crew paid a surprise visit to the workplace of Joseph Oberhauser sometime in the 1970s. Joseph Oberhauser was allegedly an official at the Belsec camp. We see in a rad on page 400 that 20 years after the war, the West German government began a number of trials against alleged members of the Reinhard camps. Why they waited 20 years, I don't know. Life sentences were being given. One allegedly committed suicide. A couple years before in the Soviet Union, 13 people were sentenced to death. Joseph Oberhauser got 4.5 years. He'd already spent years of his post-war life in prison due to a Soviet military tribunal conviction. But 4.5 years is a strangely lenient sentence if one believes he was a top administrator in a death camp that killed over 500,000 people. I think I know why he got such a light sentence. Next is Landsman's Shoah, DVD Disc 2, Chapter 2.
Ja, bitte, wie viele Liter von Bier schenken Sie pro Tag aus? Sie können nicht antworten? Warum nicht?
2 Pilze, Wasser.
Ja. Aber
Sobibor and Treblinka both allegedly had mass escapes, so there were a number of Jewish inmate eyewitnesses. Belsec, in contrast, only had one escapee who survived into the post-war period. A couple others allegedly escaped but did not survive past 1946. The one surviving Belsec inmate was Rudolf Rieder, the one survivor for 600,000 people. But the way he escaped is kind of hard to believe. Arad quotes Rudolf Rieder's book on page 264 and 265. One morning I was told by the bully Erman that there was need for tin in the camp. I went with a truck accompanied by 4 SS men and a guard to Lvov. After a whole day of loading the tin sheets, I remained in the car under the guard of one of the bullies, while all the others went for entertainment. For hours I sat without moving. Then I saw that my guard had fallen asleep and was snoring. Without thinking, instinctively I slid down the car. The bully continued sleeping. I stood on the sidewalk, appearing as if I were arranging the tin sheets, but slowly moving toward Legionel Street, where the traffic was quite heavy. I pulled my hat over my eyes. The streets were dark and nobody saw me. I remembered where a Polish woman, my landlady, lived. I went there and she hid me. Here are some problems I have with Rudolf Rieder's story. Number 1. I can't really picture prisoners in a top-secret death camp going on basic errands into the middle of a city. Number 2. The SS were the elite forces of the German army. Why would 4 of them go do an errand, as opposed to just regular members of the German army? Could Rieder have been making it more dramatic by having his story include 4 SS men? Number 3. There's 6 people, 4 SS men, a guard, and Rieder. With 5 able-bodied men, was it really necessary to take 1 inmate and jeopardize the secrecy of the camp? Especially considering that Rudolf Rieder was 61 years old. We look at the University of California Library Catalog and see born 1881. Considering that they went into town to load up a truck with metal plates which could be heavy, and with all the people in the camp to choose from, why bring a 61-year-old man as that 6th person? Also, notice this book here and in Arad's bibliography. Such an important account, yet no English translation until 1999. By the way, while we're here, if you're wondering what a bibliography on the Reinhard camps looks like, here's Samuel Rosman, the guy that testified at Nuremberg that they used women's hair for mattresses for German women. Down here is Yechiel Reichman, the guy who put fat women face down on the fire because they burned the best. Here is Eli Rosenberg, a guy who testified at the Eichmann trial that they packed 400 people into each bedroom-sized room at the Treblinka gas chamber and mentioned repeatedly that the exhaust they used was from a diesel engine. And here's Adelbert Ruckerl, a Holocaust writer who heavily relies on Joseph Oberhauser's confession. Before we segued into looking at a slice of Yitzhak Arad's bibliography, we were looking at problems with Rudolf Rieder's Belsec escape story. Let's get back to that. Number 4. The guard fell asleep and started snoring? With a camp run like this, why did no one else escape? Number 5. He pulled his hat over his eyes so no one would see his face, but does that mean he was wearing street clothes? Shouldn't he have been more worried about some sort of uniform he was wearing rather than people recognizing his face? Landsman's group continues to pose as a film crew doing a piece on beer sales.
Wie viele Liter von Bier pro Tag schenken Sie aus?
Ja, sag's so, das ist ja wurscht. Ja, ungefähr, kannst ja ungefähr sagen.
Ja, ungefähr. Wie viele Liter von Bier schenken Sie aus pro Tag?
4, 5 Hektoliter.
Bitte?
4, 5 Hektoliter.
4, 5 Hektoliter? Ja, das ist viel. Ja, und Sie arbeiten seit lange hier?
Ja, beim Rheinball circa 20 Jahre.
20 Jahre, ja. Aber warum wollen Sie nicht
Das hat seinen Grund.
Ihre Gesicht?
Hat seinen Grund.
Welcher Grund?
Das ist nicht so wichtig.
Ja, aber warum nicht, bitte?
If Rudolf Rieder was the only inmate eyewitness to survive out of 600,000 people, and he got out by going on an errand into town, that means the security around the camp perimeter must have been tight. Let's look at Arad's map to see the fortifications. There are watchtowers on the corners of the camp, but besides that there's just this, a barbed wire fence. I thought that barbed wire was used to keep farm animals in an enclosure. Can't humans just grab it where there's no barb and pull it apart so that someone else can crawl through? But this wasn't just any barbed wire fence. It had tree branches woven into it. Here's the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum website in summer 2005. We'll come up here and highlight something. Fine boughs woven into the barbed wire fence and trees planted around the perimeter served as camouflage. Ah, now that's some good design for a security fence in a death camp. But wouldn't the branches hang up on the barbs and make the barbs ineffective? And also, here's the story I have. During Christmas, I noticed that my Christmas tree gets dry and brittle in a matter of weeks, and the needles start falling off onto the floor. Funny how that same thing wouldn't happen with branches in this fence, what with the roaring cremation fires blowing smoke and heat all over the place. And strange that if they can go into town on an errand for something as obscure as tin sheets to the city of Lvov, as Rudolf Rieder said, that they couldn't also go and get some normal fencing material there also.
Erkennen Sie dieser Mann? Nein? Christian Wirth, Herr Oberhauser. Sie erinnern Belsec? Haben Sie Erinnerung aus Belsec? Nein? Nein? Und erinnern Sie die Gruben, die sind aus